On September 6, 1982, a family of 6 set out for the Wells Gray campsite in British Columbia, one of Canada's most beautiful and wild natural parks. They brought tents, food, a small boat, and most importantly, the excitement of any family on vacation. Bob and Jackie Johnson, a gentle, middle-aged couple, beloved by the people of Kamloops. With them was their young daughter Michelle, who had just married George Bentley, and their 2 young children, Janet, 13, and Karen, 11. A typical family, no feuds, no trouble. But they would never return. What could wipe 6 people off the face of the earth without anyone noticing, in a peaceful country like Canada? And why? After nearly 2 weeks, no one called the police. They disappeared into nature. And nature, majestic as it was too quiet. No one heard the gunshots. No one ran away in the night. No trace of blood on the lawn or in the pond. In the early days, the Johnsons' absence was only a vague concern. Neighbors thought they were extending their vacation. Co-workers thought they had changed their plans. And then, time passed. On September 13, 7 days after they had last been seen, a small detail shattered the placid shell. One of Bob Johnson's relatives, after repeated phone calls that went unanswered, called the police. But even then, people thought only of an accident. Maybe the car had broken down. Maybe they had gotten lost. No one could imagine they had been murdered, brutally and deliberately. A month later, the car was found burned. In the woods. In the wilderness. 6 skeletons inside. All had been shot. 1 shot to each person. Coldly, the Johnsons were not missing. They were exterminated. The burned-out car lay in the middle of a pine forest, miles from the main road. No one had seen it by accident. No one had smelled the smoke. And as the police followed every blade of grass, every tire track, every remaining bone, they knew this was no accident. This was a targeted murder, planned. On August 6, 1982, the Johnson family, along with their daughter Michelle, her husband George Bentley, and their 2 young granddaughters, Janet and Karen, set out for a camping trip in Wells Gray Provincial Park, about 120 kilometers north of Kamloops. They were in a blue Ford pickup truck, pulling a silver camper, a familiar camping vehicle for nature-loving families. They packed everything for the trip: food, dinnerware, fishing rods, a Super 8 camera, even a small boat. None of them knew it would be their last trip. Wells Gray Provincial Park is one of British Columbia's largest natural parks, covering more than 5,400 square kilometers, and is known for its waterfalls, pristine forests, wildlife, and utter silence. There's no phone reception. No streetlights. And in 1982, no surveillance cameras, a haven for those who need to escape the world. But also the perfect place to disappear, or make someone else disappear. The Johnsons set up camp near Bear Creek Falls, a remote area that few people know about. No ranger stations. No managed campsites. They were completely alone in the wilderness, and that's when peace became a double-edged sword. On August 16th to 10th, days after they left, friends and family began to worry. Michelle didn't show up for work. The girls didn't return to school. No one called, no one sent the usual postcards, but no one really panicked. Who wouldn't want to extend the holidays until August 22nd? Still no news. At this point, Bob Johnson's parents called to report him missing, and then Kamloops police began an investigation. But the strange thing was, there was nothing to investigate. On September 13, 1982, nearly a month after they disappeared, a patrolling forestry officer found a burned-out car in the woods, off a mostly unused dirt road. When the forensics team arrived, they confirmed it. It was the Johnsons' pickup. Inside the trunk, hidden behind a pile of ashes and a mangled metal frame, were 6 skeletons. The police were in a panic. They had never dealt with anything like this. 6 people, 3 generations, killed, and the bodies burned to cover up the crime. At the scene, there were no signs of a struggle. No bullet casings. No suspicious footprints. The killer was not just a killer, he was a calm, calculating man who knew the forest very well. He knew how to kill. He knew how to burn. And most importantly, he knew how to disappear. Why were 6 people killed? Why did they have to be burned? And how could no one hear anything in the middle of a forest where tourists had camped? As the news spread, Kamloops was gripped by fear. People began locking their doors. Children were not allowed out at night. People were whispering suspiciously. A place that once prided itself on being police-free became a dead zone. If that could happen to the Johnson family, no one would be safe. The press dubbed it the Wells Gray Massacre. National television stations descended on Kamloops. The FBI was called in to help analyze the case. But nothing. No witnesses. No cameras. No motive. What really happened in the woods? Was it an accident? Was it a random murder? Was it someone who had been watching the family for a long time? A chilling question suddenly popped into everyone's mind. Is there someone, right here in town, smiling at you, but who actually burned your family alive in the woods? The Johnsons and Bentleys were not just victims, they were people whose dreams, laughter, and lives were brutally snuffed out. George and Edith Johnson, nature-loving grandparents who often went camping with their children and grandchildren. Michelle and Bob Johnson, a young couple with 2 young daughters who lived simply and always put family first. Janet, 13, and Karen, 11, 2 smart, active girls who loved animals and loved to draw and play with their grandparents. They did not die in an accident. They died because someone chose to kill them. On purpose. Premeditated. Calculated. Police began combing through the Wells Gray area from early August to mid-September. They interviewed more than 1,500 people. Among the suspects were a convicted felon who had attacked a campsite visitor, a bachelor who lived in the woods, known for poaching and threatening others, and David William Shearing, a name that didn't stand out at first. David Shearing was a 23-year-old man who lived near the Wells Gray Park. He seemed mild-mannered and polite, and had studied mechanical repair. The police asked him a few questions and let him go. No criminal record. No grudge against the Johnson family. No reason to suspect anything, but then a clue led them on a tangent. A friend of David's said he had talked about seeing a beautiful silver camper and wanting it. The Johnsons' camper was silver. An investigator noticed that a camper identical to the Johnsons had been seen parked behind a gas station for weeks after the disappearance. The police went to the scene. After several changes of ownership, they finally tracked down the seller of the camper, David Shearing. At this point, he could no longer deny it. On November 19, 1983, more than a year after the murder, David Shearing was arrested and questioned. He confessed everything. But what took everyone's breath away was the way he described the crime, as if he were describing a picnic. I saw them camping at Bear Creek. I watched them for a few days. I just wanted the camper. He waited until they were eating dinner. He walked up and started shooting them one by one, but that wasn't the worst of it. David Shearing didn't kill Janet and Karen right away, he kept them there for a few days. He kept them in fear. And raped them. After he'd satisfied his sick fantasy, he killed them both, and burned the entire car to get rid of the evidence. No one could believe it. No one, not even the most seasoned cops, could keep calm when hearing that confession. A camper robbery, turned into a rape, turned into a massacre. How could a normal young man do something so terrible? What signs did he have that he was dangerous? But no one noticed. How could someone watch, plan, act and feel nothing after all? He looked at me and said, "Can I get parole if I cooperate?" One officer recalled, "I've never seen anyone talk about 6 lives as if they were trading for dinner." On April 16, 1984, in the Supreme Court of British Columbia, David Shearing, now David Ennis, went on trial on 6 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecutor detailed, he shot each of them one by one as they ate dinner. None of them had a chance of survival. The 2 girls were held captive, abused for days before they were murdered. No one could hold back the tears. The Johnson family was now left with only a few blood relatives, but their souls were broken. But Bob Johnson, the girls' grandfather, never returned to the old house. "I used to love the woods. Now every branch is bloody." In 2008, exactly 25 years after the murder, David Shearing applied for clemency. The whole of Canada was shocked. A petition against David's release was signed by 55,000 people in just 1 week. MPs, politicians, and the entire family of the victim wrote letters in protest. Canadian media ran the headline, "The monster asks to be released from the cage." Fortunately, the request was denied, but David has the right to reapply for parole every 2 years. Each time he does, the Johnson family's pain is relived. When looking back at the entire record, there are things that make people shudder. David was arrested for property damage, menacing others, and suspicious behavior with children, but he always got away with it because of lack of evidence. If someone had looked more closely, if someone had believed the unsettling feeling when they saw him lurking near the campsite. A retired investigator shared, "Always be vigilant, even in the safest places. Trust your instincts. If you see something wrong, speak up, and if you are in a position of power, protect the vulnerable before it is too late. We can't bring them back, but we can prevent the next tragedy from happening." British Columbia's Supreme Court Justice. 1984. Ellie, the imaginary girl in the opening, doesn't really exist. But Janet and Karen do. They did exist. They laughed, they dreamed, they lived, and then one day in the woods, everything disappeared. If it were your child, would you have enough time to save it?